Hello, hello, hello. Happy Wednesday. Wednesday, the hump day. Who doesn't love a Wednesday? Coming at you Wednesday morning. Maybe you'll see this probably tomorrow. Had a few things I wanted to talk about today. Mainly the top five big lies that the pro-Palestinian repeat ad nauseum over and over and over again. Let's start with the breakdown of these five. One is the occupation, Gazan occupation. What is the occupied people gonna do? This is a contextual. This is a contextual point. They're trying to essentially give a reason or legitimacy to the actions of October 7th. The second big lie is the refusal to accept the war crimes that were perpetrated on October 7th, mainly the burning of babies and families, and the mass rape that occurred. The third is they love to use this. Recently on Piers Morgan, you heard that bozo, unfunny clown Bassem Youssef talking about the Hannibal Directive. And the fourth is Israel is starving Gaza. The fifth is that there's an Israeli genocide happening. So let's start at the top. Number one, context. I mentioned this in previous conversations with you all, that sometimes you just need to make the very simple point. Gaza is an occupied territory. Simple question: how many Jews, how many Israeli soldiers were in Gaza on October 6th? How many? Simple answer: none. How many synagogues are actually in Gaza? None. And they found amazing archaeology of Jewish synagogue, a beautiful mosaic from a synagogue of a thriving Jewish community in Gaza in the 6th and 5th century AD, before the advent of Islam. So that's a whole other conversation. We're not gonna go there on what is this occupied territory, disputed territory, but occupation means you are occupying something. And there's just a renaming of dictionary definitions for the Pallywood crowd. I mean, words don't really mean anything to these people. They're just Alinskyeites, you know, like a very, very basic Marxist power play, which is take the language and invert it. So if it suits your purposes to call it an occupation, despite there not being any occupying powers on the land itself, you're going to still call it occupation, and you'll like add a word before it. You'll call it like a virtual occupation or a neo occupation, occupation 2.0, or the Israeli Zionist version of an occupation. No, if you want to go down that road, it's a blockade. Okay, if you want to say the sea, the land, and we didn't allow the trade to come in, that would be called a blockade. They don't use the word blockade. Why? Because it's a military term. It associates with a military tactical response to what? Jihadi genocidal maniacs that are an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood that are trying to do what? To arm and fortify, to make Gaza into a terror fortress, which they did. So it justifies, if anything, going to see all the armaments, the tens of thousands of rockets that these people had, the amount of fortifications, subterranean fortifications. This explains why there would be a blockade. They were able to do it. Why? Because it wasn't really even a blockade. They share a border with Egypt, the largest Arab country in the region. How can you have a blockade if there's another country that's also not allowing the transfer of goods and services? And by the way, we've discovered, once the IDF did go into Rafah and the Philadelphia corridor, over 100 to 200 tunnels, one of the largest smuggling routes in the world. And this was happening, many believe, obviously, with the knowledge by the Egyptian army that this was happening. Um, so that's the first thing. There was no occupation. There was not even a real blockade. And the blockade, if it did existed, is justified by what we've seen now that we're there, and just the mass amounts of rockets that have been fired into Israel over the last 14, 15 years from civilian centers onto civilian centers, which would justify any normal country doing the exact same thing. So that takes care of the first big lie, occupation, big lie. Number two, this where we see, it's just it's this this really hurts because essentially the denial of the Jewish tragedy and war crimes that happened on October 7th really is a form, in my opinion, one of the deep forms of anti-Semitism that I think Jews weren't really aware of, or hadn't really been talked about so much between ourselves, which is the refusal to allow the Jew to grieve, the refusal to the Jew to mourn. No, there was none of these things that happened. No, there was no mass rapes. No, entire families weren't burnt. Um, they managed to basically deny a pixelated reality. I mean, Hamas did not hide what they did. The exact opposite. They put it on video cameras. There's surveillance footage all over these towns. There's 1 hour edited, for specific segments of the public to be able to see the degree of heinous crimes that were committed. And then you got this refusal, despite the fact that you have this level of sunlight on these crimes, that the murderers themselves, the war criminals themselves, GoPro'd it, preening in front of the camera. Many of these victims, their phones were taken. They were streamed on their own apps or called their own families and posted them in what is like adding serious insult to mortal injury. I've seen pictures myself of burnt families. You see them. And so then the question really is like, how do they even justify themselves? Essentially, you have to basically say Israel as a society is a closed, totalitarian, brainwashed, country, because you'd have to basically whitewash all the eyewitness testimonies that have come about talking about seeing the mass rapes, people who have survivors who have killed themselves, and part of the reason they killed themselves is because they were witnessing mass rapes and they didn't do anything, they hid. You have first responders. These are people that really are they're in the trauma medical arena. They're not political apparatchiks, and you hear these testimonies of these people, what they saw. Jewish women raped, their private parts mutilated. This is not something that anybody would want to say, and they're breaking down while they're saying it. There's a lot of unreleased videos that are not going to be given for the Pallywood porn folk, and just because there's a certain level of dignity, we want to save those families that aren't. Everybody knows everybody in Israel. Like, you wouldn't be able to get away with these lies, and it's denying the fact that Israel is a free society. Yes, you could probably pick on the corners and on the sides certain things that Israel does from a security perspective that may make it not the most open society in the world, and it's totally understandable given the fact that they've fought in 8 wars in 75 years, 2 intifadas. This is what's going to happen when you have a pretty security conscious country, but it's a free society. And this does not fit with the composition of a free society to be able to get away with such a mass propaganda campaign, which is what the other side is claiming. And it's so convenient, right? Why would you want to have to admit that these are barbaric pogroms of the highest order, and admit that your side is basically evil. So they'll do anything to deny it, and even if it means refusing to allow the victims to mourn. So, onto the third big lie, the Hannibal Directive. Like any great lie, it has some level of, I don't want to say truth, but some kernel of something. There is, there was some orders given to not allow vehicles to re-enter Gaza, but it wasn't clear. The directives weren't clear. The Hannibal Directive is being used as like the nice word salad that kind of resonates. Oh, Hannibal Directive. Oh, that sounds very, military. And it was a directive that was discontinued in 2016. So it wasn't like there was Operational Hannibal Directive. Here we go, and they're blasting it out to their commanders. It was some direction given that they shouldn't allow vehicles to go back into Gaza, and the most that has been reported that this could have this kind of friendly fire is, I think, 10 to 12 victims. So out of 1,200, you're going to use this notion of a non-existent directive to talk about, excusing all the 1,200 deaths because 10 to 12 people might have been killed by it. We know that in Nahal Oz, 53 soldiers were killed, 7 kidnapped. So obviously the Hannibal Directive, they were killed on their base. This weren't killed in cars. 7 were kidnapped. So the Hannibal Directive wasn't obviously in play. If there was, there would be nobody kidnapped. We know in the Riyam kibbutz that they claimed that there was a report from Haaretz. This was directly denied by the police force in the kibbutz. There was a car that was blown up in the Erez crossing. Maybe one hostage that hasn't been confirmed. But point is like you're using this like very nebulous, very vague possibility to describe all the deaths. It was used by Bassem Youssef to talk about all the cars that were burnt out, saying how could all these cars be burnt out. There's a video, you can go on Twitter, on X, you can find it for yourself in, I think, a surveillance video in the city of Sderot, where you literally see a car driving and one of the Hamas terrorists taking out an RPG and blowing it up. They had RPGs, they had grenades, they had Molotov cocktails. This doesn't require rocket science to figure out how you could blow up all these cars and set them to fire. They had the weaponry to do it. We saw them doing it in some cases, but no, you're going to use some non-existent directive that wasn't really clear, given to like 3 communities with cars returning to Gaza, which they only can get one car that might have been taken down, which we don't know if it included the hostage or not. And you're going to apply this to everything because it suits your political narratives. So that to me is like classic Pallywood stuff. The fourth is that Israel's starving Gaza. I mean, look, America tried to build a pier. Okay, they wanted the pier to nowhere, I call it. And we know that Israel has documented literally millions of crates of food being delivered. There's a question I'm not raising right now, but there is a question of whether in a time of war, is it required of the army that's trying to defeat a terrorist army that they're required to provide the food and the electricity? Obviously the woke West, there's not even a question, but in terms of history of war, it is. Nonetheless, Israel is, and what's happening is that either Israel has to go through the process to make sure nothing's getting like smuggled in, so it doesn't. It's not so simple as just driving on the carpool lane into these territories, but they have to be checked and monitored. But also, we know what happens with Hamas genocidal maniacs. They don't want this food to be distributed. They hoard it for themselves. We have videos of it. We have videos of them shooting people when these trucks are being offloaded. So, like, what we're supposed to deny the fact that Israel has the UN shows depots of these trucks waiting to go in, but the distribution network is difficult, obviously. So we know that Israel is making a great effort. We know that we've allowed America to try to do it themselves, and they had a very difficult time of doing it. There's no way we can just allow crates of what we don't know inside them to go into a war zone. No country would allow that. So this is just a great big lie that Israel's trying to basically create a situation of mass starvation when it's quite the opposite. And all the evidence points to it, in sense of Israel declaring what they're sending, the pictures of the depots, and then Hamas firing on the distribution of that network to hoard it for themselves, and the fact that America tried to build a pier that Israel had no problem on its territory to be able to deliver this food, and the pier just didn't work. Then the last lie, the Israeli genocide. So this is kind of rankles me, because the word genocide was actually coined by a Jew to describe a Jewish genocide. And classic Pallywood, classic jihadi propaganda tools to invert, right? So Israel's committing the genocide, not on October 7th, which they said they would do it over and over and over again. But genocide, let's define it, is the deliberate, underlined, deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim and intent of destroying that group or nation. So, like, even by Hamas's estimates, doesn't close water. The fact that Israel has the capability of doing a genocide in 2 days, that should make you pause. But the fact is that Israel has lost hundreds of soldiers going house to house, most of them booby-trapped with tunnels under them, to fight an enemy that purposely, with intent, puts their civilians in harm's way. And despite that fact, Israel is fighting more morally than any army in the most complex urban battlefield known to man. We know that Israel has killed at least 16 to 20,000 combatants, and with that figure, with 42,000, or that the Hamas terrorists have thrown out, even then the casualty to civilian ratio is lower than Afghanistan, Mosul, Kabul. It's just insane. So the clear numbers make it clear that that's just not possible. It's just not the case. So if you care about stats, that should make a dent. But Israel also, from a tactical point of view, minimizes it on purpose more than any other army. It drops leaflets, it makes phone calls, it does roof knocking, and it has evacuation in designated areas. So, like, the idea that this is is preposterous, and it's really a desperate lie that seems to be able to resonate, because the acceptance, the fact that Israel is fighting morally, justly, and effectively is hard to swallow. So those are the 5 lies. Those are the 5 lies that need to be responded to, because they're playing. This is what's tracking, and I see it whenever these people get on the call. These moral cretins, these faux intellects that they just basically will repeat. And like Goebbels, you just repetition works. Just say it over and over and over and over again, and it will tend to penetrate and sink in. The fact is that we're dealing with also a society that's very well versed, and I really think there should be a lot of study on this. But Pallywood Productions, I mean, they know how to play the victim, and it's kind of an unspoken thing. It's weird, but they know how to play to the camera. They've been doing it. It's been their national liberating strategy for decades and decades, and it works. They are PR drones, essentially, and they're used by their leadership as PR drones, as death counts mount. They put them as human shields, and it tracks well in the West. You get a Candace Owens saying, "Look at this, but." And I'll say this one last time to that last point, which is intent is almost the most important thing when you're talking about a crime. Somebody who murders somebody and somebody who accidentally hurts somebody, especially if they were trying to protect themselves, it's like you can't ignore it, and you can't create moral equivalency without understanding intent. And this is just like, read the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle. Like this is thousands of years old. This is not a new concept. So I appreciate your time. Hopefully this was edifying, and we'll speak soon.